teaching taught me how not to teach. Setting up a tech business is an exercise of pure masochism. Tuition was where I really learned what worked. You need to be responsive to what the market wants.
This is the Education Business Podcast for all founders and business owners in the education sector. This podcast is for you if you have an education business or you're thinking about starting one. That could be tutoring, publishing, holiday clubs. It really doesn't matter. You're in business and you're also in education. But most of all, you're focused on improving outcomes for children in the way you know best, through your business. I'm Claire Riley, co-founder of educational resources website Classroom Secrets, and I'll be sharing how to make your education business bigger, better, and have more impact through my own experiences and also the conversations I have with other founders and business owners in education. The Education Business Podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets, helping you to support your children's learning. John, welcome to the Education Business Podcast. Tell us your career story. So, you're in teaching and now you are president of the Tutors Association. You've got your own education business. How did that happen? What were the key things that happened along the way? What were the sort of signposts that pointed you in that direction? How did you get here?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So I was in teaching. I was a science teacher. I was on the Teach First program, which I'm sure some of your listeners will probably know. So the whole pitch was you do 2 years in the classroom and you go and do something else. I mean, it was interesting how I never actually intended to join Teach First until a couple of months before the applications closed. I was originally going to join the Navy as a pilot, but they lost the paperwork, so that wasn't going to happen. So I thought, well, I've got to do something else while I put the paperwork in again. And so I decided to join Teach First, and I joined in 2010, and I was supposed to do a full 2 years, but I ended up leaving in the end of the spring term in 2012. And effectively what happened is I'd given a young lady too many detentions, according to her and her parents. And the school said, well, we'll put you on performance management. I said, look, I don't really like staying at your school. I don't think I'm a good fit for your school. So there's no point putting me on performance management when I'm only going to be here for one more term. And the head teacher said, well, I'm still going to. I said, if you put me on performance management, I will resign and I will not come back after Easter. And we're about a week away from the Easter break at that point. So the next day he says, oh, no, he says, so I'm going to put you on performance management anyway. So the next day I resigned, to which he was surprised. And I don't know if it was just he was quite dim or because he just didn't believe me or what, but I handed in my resignation letter and I was quite relieved, actually, because I actually really, really disliked teaching in the school I was at. It wasn't really a good fit. I was not really that good or interested in behavior management. The behavior management approach that I've been taught to adopt was basically overturned by the school on day one. So teach first, teach you one thing, and then the school says, oh, no, don't do any of that. And then when everything fell apart completely, they sort of said, well, go and watch the best teacher in the school who deals with behavior management. And lo and behold, he was doing all the things which I originally planned to do when I first came in. I was like, this is ridiculous, totally ridiculous. So I left, and originally I went to work for an educational charity, which was then very small and just starting up, called the Brilliant Club. And it's perhaps a bit of a tale of my age that they're not now small and just starting up. They're quite well established, so they're doing really well, and I'm pleased to see it. And they place PhD students into schools to deliver short programs that will then help with widening access. So giving students that don't necessarily have a long family history of going to university a bit of an insight as to what it might be like. So I worked for the Brilliant Club for what was originally supposed to be a 3-month contract, but then got extended a bit. And when it eventually did end, someone just a couple of weeks before it ended said, oh, you should be a tutor, because I've got a pretty good general knowledge. The only thing I was ever told about that I was good at in my teaching observations was your subject knowledge is great. And this was immediately followed by all of the terrible things about my lessons that were wrong and bad, and students that were not listening to me and all the rest of it. But at least my subject knowledge was great. I mean, I knew what an atom was and all this sort of stuff, which was great. But yeah, everything else was going down the path. So I became a tutor in 2012, and it worked surprisingly well, because there are not many behavior issues with the sort of tuition I was delivering, which was mainly highly academic students or students who wanted to become highly academic if they weren't quite there already, but they were generally fairly motivated to do it, and they were generally from fairly supportive families. So for them, having someone who had great subject knowledge, they didn't give a damn if I had any behavior management skills or not. The kid was going to sit there and soak it all up. So yeah, I became a tutor in 2012, and I became one of the first members, I think the 36th member of the Tutors Association when it was founded in 2013. I didn't found it, I hasten to add. I was not at all involved in founding it, despite having been president now for a couple of years. And for a long time, I was just a full-time tutor, right? And I rapidly, within 2 months, just from joining up to different tuition agencies, earned far more than I did as a teacher, and was far better at it. I often joke, teaching taught me how not to teach, and tuition was where I really learned what worked. Because the good thing about working as a tutor is you're completely responsible for everything, right? You can't hide behind some faceless bureaucracy and some set of policies and say, well, the policy is we do it this way. If it doesn't work or it does work, it doesn't matter. You have to just do things that are going to work. You have to be responsive to students. The whole point of tuition. And I think that was a really valuable lesson it's a really valuable lesson for life in general. The focus on things that work and a responsiveness for who you're actually there to serve and trying to help is really, really important. So I was a tutor, and I was a full-time tutor doing reasonably well with that. I did various other things in the meantime. I set up a character education program with some teachers and psychotherapists. It was really interesting. There was a lot of interesting character education around 2014, 2015, but unfortunately, it just wasn't really scalable. So we ended up closing that. And then in 2017, I set up the company, which is the company I own, which is a company called Get My Grades. It's a technology and education consulting company. And we do lots of work all at different places around the world, implementing education technology projects in places in Africa, working with different partners and clients, working on different complex bids for corporate or government entities and whatever else. And we've done some really interesting projects with in places like South Africa and Uganda and elsewhere, other places as well. And then that gave me a completely separate experience. I originally, believe it or not, set out to create an EdTech company with a budget of about £20,000. And oh my goodness, that was an enormous mistake. That is nowhere near close to a budget that you need for building a tech company back in 2017. The first couple of developers we went through were all not at all suitable for whatever reason. So that was a really challenging experience. And I often see people say, well, you know what, I'm just going to start a tech company and then I'm going to do much, much better. And I don't want to discourage anyone from doing something ambitious, but you must also, I don't want people to enter it with rose-tinted glasses, and the vast majority of people do, because setting up a tech business is extraordinarily, it's an exercise of pure masochism. You've got to want to go through an enormous amount of work and pain and very likely failure in order to try and become someone that creates an education technology company. And the vast majority of education technology companies do fail. And I don't want people to say, oh, like that's a non-starter can never do that. But you might be able to do it, but that's just a reality. And the reality is that the investment world, the startup investment world, doesn't really see education as a very strong bet for investors' money. So most investors are reluctant, let's say, in an optimistic scenario, to put a lot of money into an education investment because they don't really understand the market. The market is very odd. There's almost this sort of clinical aversion to any form of privatization amongst parts of the education sector around the world. And many, many teachers, for example, it's not very appealing for them to sort of consider buying something from a tech company. And I think many of the people on your podcast will resonate with that. Many of them they either are or have been former teachers, and they'll have had spam from all sorts of tech companies, and many of them will promise the world and not be able to deliver it. It's an incredibly complicated and difficult thing to try and start an education technology company. It's like the old adage, if you can't get the job unless you've got experience, and you can't get experience unless you get the job. And it's no different from an employment perspective as it is for a tech company startup, right? You've got to have some clients in the first place to take a punt. And it's no surprise that teachers and schools don't tend to want to take a punt really on anything. And they often don't have the money, to be honest, to take a punt. But investors also know that. So the situation for people creating education technology companies is challenging. Now, if you've got an absolute knockout idea and you are willing to work extremely hard and you've got Ideally, you've got some sort of access to the right kind of people to help develop the solution you want to develop, then great, it could still work. It is possible. There are some good education technology companies out there. It's not entirely straightforward.
No, no, not all. I mean, just listening to you, yeah, I've heard this story so many times before, and it's my own story as well. I think you hit the nail on the head with like devs are really hard to find. I talk to quite a lot of people who go, "All right, yeah, I've got this idea and I'm going to do all the content and then I'm going to hire this person who can make me this website."
I was there.
Yeah,
That was
exactly.
me.
And there are so anyone can say that they can do a website. What they mean is, "Oh, I can make you a website on WordPress," which is very different to actually developing a proper website. And I think for us, it's been getting that one dev who was the right person first, and then they help you get the other devs and they help you train up other people to be devs. We've even had, like, one of the things that we do now actually is we look for the right people coming through in IT, and then we train them on certain elements of dev and they end up becoming a developer along the way. So completely resonate with that. Just another thing that you said that I picked up on, it must have been quite a good thing. So you have been president of the Tutors Association for 5 years. The fact that you went through that performance management issue at school, I speak to a lot of people. Sometimes they've come from a tutoring background, sometimes they haven't, but loads of people, they're either heading that way or there's some kind of issue. I guess it gives you an understanding of where a teacher who's now a tutor might be coming from when you're sort of helping them grow the business or helping them operate in this new world, which is a business world, but also education, which I think actually is a really hard thing to do.
The mindset required is totally different. The skill required to do the job well day to day is quite similar, right? So there are subtle differences. So the main difference between teaching and tuition is that tuition is by definition highly responsive to a small group or an individual learner or a student. And if you turn up to your tutorials with just like a lesson plan and you're not going to deviate from it very much, you're completely missing the point, right? You might as well just give them a video. The whole point of tuition is that you can sense or identify when a student is not understanding or they don't have the right, they've got a misconception, and you can address it, right? That's why tuition, that's why there is this famous 2 sigma problem, which actually it's very interesting that most teacher training courses, they teach you all about Bloom's taxonomy and nothing about Bloom's 2 sigma problem, which is that tuition tends to be 2 standard deviations more effective than classroom teaching. But the main reason is not like completely mysterious, is that you can just intervene as soon as the student has got a problem and address that problem. So if a student's telling me, oh yeah, photosynthesis, it's really important that plants get enough oxygen, you can stop immediately, because obviously plants don't need oxygen to do photosynthesis. They produce it as a waste. So there's no point keeping on ploughing on with the rest of your proposed lesson about this. They have no fundamental idea what plants are actually doing. So there's no point in anything else until you address that. Now, in a classroom environment, you won't have, just by the nature of how many students you deal with, you won't have the opportunity to identify that misconception with every student very, very early on. And good classroom teaching you can use like mini whiteboards, what does plants need, photosynthesis, for example, and you can see if you identify, oh, there's a problem here. A couple of students really don't get it. We've got to recover that area. But with tuition, the whole point is you can be ultra focused and you can be that responsive all the time. And really good quality tuition is responsive all the time. The student can respond, and however they demonstrate a level of understanding or not, as the case may be, is how you then either accelerate or wind back on the pace of the lesson. And I've had every sort of situation where students are flying through and then all of a sudden, bang, something they don't understand it, or have completely misunderstood a question that you've just done with them. And then you stop and you go through something in great detail. And so the whole point is that tuition is extremely responsive, and that's why it works and that's why it's effective. Those similar kinds of things can be borne in mind in a classroom context, especially really, really good teachers. They can put in that level of responsiveness. They're looking out for feedback from all the children. They're asking students questions without necessarily asking the ones to put their hand up who are super keen and know the answer. But the important part is that responsiveness. And also the students have to think constantly, because they know They know they're going to be called upon every second to sort of provide the next bit of feedback for the tutor to identify, have they understood this or not? And so there's no coasting in a tuition lesson, right? If you're in front of me in a tutorial, it's like a workout. And if your personal trainer doesn't make sure you're sweating by the end of it, then they're useless. You should sack them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I was a tutor, and it was through tutoring and getting a better understanding, I think, of those misconceptions that I developed the content for Classroom Secrets, which was then really helpful in the classroom because I had a better understanding of what the misconceptions really were, especially in a tutoring context when you might have a year 4 child, but really you're sort of teaching him a specific topic from year 2 and then year 3 and then year 4 all in one go. And you're just sort of moving them through really fast. You really kind of learn how the curriculum does connect together. Whereas when you're in a classroom, sometimes you're just thinking about your aspect of it. And you might be thinking, well, I know what's in the year 3 curriculum, but it's not the same. You don't sort of have that same connection.
Not at all.
No.
And yeah, I've taught A-level chemistry to a 13-year-old before. And people are going to sit there and think, that's bonkers. What is this guy on about? Why is he doing that? But actually, it was because he was perfectly capable and he was really interested. And he left that tutorial absolutely fascinated that there's this world beyond the very basic stuff that he'd been taught. And that lad is now in Cambridge. In fact, he might have even left Cambridge now, which is even more concerning for my age. But he went to Cambridge because he studied engineering. And he absolutely loved the lessons where we could go into more depth. And obviously, where there was anything he didn't understand, we take it slower and go back and make sure we recover it. And it was only because he was doing well that we could then afford to spend the time doing that. But made enormous progress.
Do you teach children as part of your business offering? Have you considered using resources from Classroom Secrets? At Classroom Secrets, we're always adding new resources for a range of subjects, and we're keen to hear your suggestions for resources too. We know that you didn't go into business to work more hours than you did in the classroom. You went into business to give you freedom. Let us help with that. Visit classroomsecrets.co.uk to sign up. Yeah, absolutely. You kind of have to just lean into what they enjoy, don't you? So, a question that I think will be on people's minds that is important to talk about. So, you're president of the Tutors Association. I follow you on LinkedIn. You're always jetting off all over the world, which when I think about that, I think, oh gosh, I'm glad I don't have to get on a plane that much. You've also got a company, Get My Grades. How do you manage your time between the two? Because we have people who have more than one business, and it's a struggle to keep both running with the same amount of momentum. How do you do that?
Yeah, it is a challenge, and I work a lot, and I'm willing to work. And I have 2 young children, which makes it even more challenging because obviously you've got all that to do, and also my wife also works. So we're a very, very busy household. But I tend to work intensively through the day, and then also very often in the evening after the children go to sleep and at night. So if you want to do something as ambitious as that, you have to be willing to work really, really hard. And you can be really efficient, but you've got to put a lot of time in, right? The idea that people can say, I mean, I used to remember when a couple of years after starting Get My Grades, I'd see people saying, oh, I want to become a digital nomad, start my own business, and then sit on the beach in Bali with my internet connection, and I'll just be doing my own business. My goodness me, these people have got no clue what's coming for them. Either they're extraordinarily lucky, or they're already wealthy, or they've got no obligations or commitments. They only need a couple of, like, $1,000 a month in Bali to buy rice and fish and whatever. But the real world is not like that. The real world, if you want to run one business successfully, let alone any more than that, you've got to work really hard. And I still do some tuition as well. Not very much these days. I don't have enough time to do a lot, but I still do. I have been a tutor constantly since 2012, and I've never had a situation where I have 0 students. So yeah, it's intense. So you've got to be willing to work hard. You've got to also be willing to work very efficiently and effectively. And I mean, I use technology tools. I use AI very effectively, but also you've got to know where you should use your own knowledge and your own input, and not just rely on ChatGPT or whatever else you're going to use. You have to have a team. So with Get My Grades, we have people that are based internationally that work closely with us. They do their side of things. They're keeping the business going on that front in different markets. Many of the markets we work in, we know and expect that 9 out of 10 projects are going to be a complete failure, but they're working on those and they're incentivized to work on those. And we manage that process regularly, and we stay in touch with them. With the Tutors Association, we have an extremely good team, and I'm really we've got people like Julius Goldthorpe, who's our general manager, who's absolutely fantastic, and he's completely invaluable. And we've got the whole team is really good, really. And that having a good team of people you can rely on and work with, whether they're close to you or whether they're a little bit more distant and they're doing their own thing and they've got more autonomy, but you've got a clear relationship, that's really crucial. And you need to understand, you need to have aligned interests, you need to have aligned principles and direction, and also you need to understand what is the expected commitment. And as long as the expectations align, the team can work really well. I work with people in Africa who have a completely different set of expectations as to how to do business than people in the UK. That's totally fine. I understand that. Now I do. I didn't in the first place. I learned that the hard way. I understand that now. I accept that, right? They do business their own certain way. We're really clear on what our non-negotiables are in terms of, obviously we have to be really, really strict on making sure there's no corruption in the supply chain or anything like this. And we're really strict on all of those forms of compliance. But in terms of how they work and how quickly they get back to you, and my investors, they sometimes go through elements of stress when we tell them that yet again another African project has either collapsed or not going to be quite what we thought it was going to be. But that's fine because we know what that's going to be like, and we're used to that, and we understand, and we have the right expectation now, so that when someone is going to promise there's some big project coming, we understand that that means there might be a possibility. Whereas in different markets, things are different. Right. So if you're going to work in China, it's different. If you're going to work in Southeast Asia, it'll be different. If you're going to work in the UK or the US, again, things are very different. And the UK and the US are not the same, of course, nor is Europe. So you've got to have expectations of your team that match the reality. There's no use you fighting to try and make everybody adopt your expectations. That's one of the things that I see people struggle with. And it's very difficult because you constantly are fighting an uphill battle. And we have been in situations before where we've had employees, we've tried to make sure that everyone's following a certain way of doing things. But it is really difficult because, yes, you can, to a limited extent, coerce people if you're their employer, right? You've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to do the other. But ultimately, if that's not how they want to work, you're going to be spending a lot of time on compliance, trying to force that compliance and actually just getting things done. If you can adapt to what they actually expect and are willing to do, and you only expect what they're going to offer by default, and you agree that that's appropriate for you and your business and whatever you're doing, it's far, far easier.
So do you feel like you've got mini cultures then in each different market?
I would go beyond that. I would actually say that I adapt almost to have a different set of expectations for each individual. And you decide whether you accept what someone's willing to offer. So there are some people that come to me and say, well, I only want to work like this. And I go, well, it's not going to work for me, so we're not going to work together. That's totally fine, right? I'm not going to go down the garden path of saying, well, let's try and see how it works. If I know there's no realistic chance. If someone says, well, I only want to work on every third Tuesday, and then every Wednesday I'll do some work if my child's not sick, and this and that and the other, and I'm only going to do this if the moon is shining blue, then I'm like, well, look, this isn't going to work for me. So this is all right. It's all fine. You go and find whichever job is going to be suitable for you, or you go and work with whichever partners you want to work with. I deal with people on an individual basis. And I would always say, if you've got a role that you're recruiting for, know how much you're willing to adapt to that role. And this is if you're an employer, but if you want to work, if you're considering partnering or collaborating with someone in any way, you don't have to be the employer as such. But if you're considering on collaborating with someone, know what you're looking for and know how much you're willing to adapt that to fit a good candidate or a good potential collaborator, partner, whatever it might be. And it's good to have that level of flexibility in your mind, because it could be that there's just cultural differences in terms of business culture, right? I don't ever expect people, any of my African partners or anything, to turn up to meetings dead on the minute, because that doesn't work. Or that the meetings are only going to be 1 hour long. They're by default, they're 2 hours long, right? But as long as you understand for each individual person you work with, what are the expectations? Doesn't really matter where those expectations are coming from, if it's because their business culture is just different, or if it's because that person's got a particular principle, or that person's Islamic, so they go to mosque every Friday, they don't want to do anything on Friday. Fine. If you can accommodate that, accommodate it. If you can't accommodate it, do your own thing, or reach your own agreement and establish it. But for me, it's on an individual basis. And I think that's partly what has helped me, whether it's through the Tutors Association or whether it's through my own company or through my tuition work. I've become, I think I've become much better at dealing with very different types of clients and partners. because it's that I've got a default expectation which adjusts for every different person I work with, and I know what to expect from them. And if the expectations are aligned, people will be happy. It's when the expectations don't align,
Mm.
you're a recipe for trouble, and that trouble will you'll get that friction all the time.
Yeah. It's almost like you have a really clear idea of what your boundaries are. And that's interesting because I think that's where a lot of teachers come into entrepreneurship and they don't have good boundaries. And that can be part of the problem. So you've talked about having a team, and I can speak from my own experience. I've got a team now. Obviously didn't start with a team, but I think entrepreneurs can struggle to hand things over. But then when you've been a teacher and now you're an entrepreneur, oh my word, does that really sort of accelerate things? And it can be you can have this team around you, but still be working on the wrong things. So what are your responsibilities now you have a team?
So I've got different responsibilities with respect to different roles, and that's unusual and also more challenging. The most common thing is that, so within the Tutors Association, I'm president, and I'm elected president, and my job is to direct on strategy and to chair the board, right? And the board is primarily elected from people who are tutors or running tuition businesses, and there's a mixture of both, and there's a mandatory requirement that at least some of the people have to be active tutors. So with the Tutors Association, much of it is about strategic oversight and representation. There is a very clear understanding of what the strategy is within TTA. We've got a really clear working direction on where we're going and how we're getting there and what kind of levels of support we're offering to people. There, you have to, if you go into running an organization, have a really clear understanding of the purpose, right? And for the Tutors Association, it's straightforward. Number one, we have maintained minimum standards in the tuition sector and promote best practice. Number two, we represent all of the tutors and tuition businesses alike. We represent them to the wider public and government, etc. And number three, we provide them support with things that they wouldn't realistically be able to do themselves, or that would be much more difficult or expensive for them to do themselves. Like, for example, compliance with regulations, which are really complex, and we've done things on that. So for me, then it's really good once you've got that really clear understanding of the strategic direction your organization is going to go in, you then can focus on that and you can understand that really well and understand how you deliver it. And with my own company, again, we understand our own skill set, we understand our own product and service offering, we understand who we can work with, and we can understand how we can adapt. And again, you've got to build that over time. And it's always about being responsive. So both my own company and the Tutors Association, you've got to be highly responsive to make sure you are working on the right thing. And for the Tutors Association, that being responsive to members. We do lots of surveys. Perhaps we're just on the edge of doing too many surveys. We're always asking for members to give us a bit of feedback. What do you like about this? What do you want to see more of? What don't you like? What could be better? Okay. And we're responsive to that feedback. And then sometimes we come up with something and people go, oh, didn't see that coming. But actually, it's because you're one of the people that didn't need or want this, but actually 70% of members have said they really, really need it. Now, that's great. You don't need it. Fine. That's all perfect. No one uses all of the benefits of membership. If you're part of a membership body, you're never going to be able to use all the benefits. But it's about being responsive and understanding, what do people want? Okay. And with my own business, we're also extremely responsive. We're responsive to the needs of the market, right? Because my own business is a profit-making business, right? The Tutors Association is non-profit and a professional body. I'm there as a custodian, as an elected president. I've been re-elected several times, but I'm still going to stop being president one day, and at that point pass over the baton to somebody else. It's not my company in the same way. But for my own business, it's about being responsive to the market. And for most people work within the free market as some kind of supplier of goods or services. You need to be responsive to what the market wants. And that doesn't matter whether you're a teacher in a school and you're supplying teaching skill and ability as an employee, or whether you want to go it alone and be an entrepreneur. You're in a free market and you're offering goods and services, and you need to make sure that what you're offering is what people want. One of the most common problems I see is that people, especially people that want to start EdTech companies, or tech companies in general, is they create a solution for what they think is a problem, but they haven't got much feedback from the market yet. And so then they bump into other people who go, I don't really want that. You've got an uphill battle from day one.
Absolutely. And I talk to people in that situation as well, and it is difficult. And I suppose that's probably why you do get teachers creating these companies, because at least they've been the customer. I think that really does have a big effect as well. What have your biggest lessons been starting out as a teacher and then transitioning into business? Because I mean, I've been on this massive journey. I don't know if you have, but I can only make assumptions. If you had to pick one thing that you could say, oh my word, this is the biggest thing I've learned, what would that be?
It's hard not to pick responsiveness because it permeates so many different areas. It's part of tuition practice, and it's also part of what is necessary to be an effective business. If you're not responsive to what's going on in the world around you, if you're trying to go against everything, you're never going to win. You're only going to achieve success if you can create something which responds to the needs of other people and responds to the circumstances. Now, it doesn't mean you've got to go with the flow on everything, right? You could still, I mean, I've gone and done lots of things which are ambitious, which were new, which were not what people originally thought, but you've got to show this is where thought leadership comes in. People think of thought leadership as this being abstract concept of, oh, I'm a thought leader because I put up loads of stuff on Instagram and I'm broadcasting all this stuff about what I think is great about the world or what I think the world should do. But that's only sort of one small part of it. A good part of thought leadership is actually leading others into considering these thoughts, not just blasting it out on social media and going, the rest of the world should adopt my view. And even worse, when people blast about on social media and they've just got ChatGPT to generate loads of stuff for them because they've got to fill out a social media schedule. I mean, I know there's a temptation to do it, right? I'm not criticizing anyone for it, but that's not really what we mean by thought leadership. And then the responsiveness element is really critical because you need to respond to how the world interacts with what you put out there. I've created new products and services, put them out to the world, and then realize, that's a bit of a dud, really. No one really wants that. So you've got to reconsider and you've got to change your offering. I've created courses and programs for people and delivered it to students, and they went, oh, no, didn't really want that, to be honest. It was okay, but it wasn't exactly what I was anticipating. So then you have to adapt it. Now, luckily, most of the things I've then done have been really successful. People have wanted them, and the feedback has not been quite so potentially damning. But the important thing there is that responsiveness. You have to be responsive to the world around you. You can put new things out there, but respond to how they're received. And if the new things are received really well, great, seize upon it. And people will no doubt give you feedback along the line if you can encourage it. And actually, one of the biggest lessons I learned was when I was president from about 2020 to 2022, not everything in the Tutors Association was going well. There were some people that didn't like the Tutors Association and had some reasons which were potentially legitimate. And dealing with that and inviting that negative comes across as negative feedback. I know people try and dress it up in euphemistic ways and say, oh, it's challenge, constructive, this, whatever. Well, at the end of the day, they didn't like it. They didn't like something about it. Now, this wasn't everyone, right? But this was a sizable subset of people that didn't like something. And you have to decide, okay, we have to respond. If we want to get these people on board, we have to adapt to their view. Now, you don't have to get everyone on board, and you can't, okay? Doesn't matter if you're selling a product or a service, if you're a non-profit, if you're a professional body, whatever you're doing, you don't need to get everyone on board, okay? In most cases. So I chose to invite all of this challenging feedback. All of the people that didn't like something. I said, tell me whatever it is you don't like. I'm an own president. Forget about me being president. I'm not going to bite your head off. Just tell me what you don't like, and I'll see if I can fix it. And if I can't fix it, I'll just tell you. If I say to you, well, you don't like TTA because it's got what someone said to me, it's got companies that are members. Okay, well, can't change that. That's going to be the way forever, really, because the way it's set up is it represents the whole tuition sector. So if you just don't like the fact that there's companies that are members, don't join. I can't fix that problem. But if your problem with TTA is, oh, I really wish it would do more of this, or I wish it would have more of that, or I really want something which has got a bit more focus on safeguarding, which is what we didn't have as much of a focus on safeguarding in the past as we do now. And for me, it's very important. And they were things where I thought, yeah, I feel this too. So I'm not alone. And actually, this is something I should push forward. So we've changed lots of things. Now, it doesn't matter if you're starting your own business, if you're a tutor yourself, even if you're a teacher in a classroom. Responsiveness to the world around you with that final backstop of you always get to choose, are you going to engage with this or not? You don't have to work anywhere in particular. You don't have to work with any particular client. You don't have to start a business or run a certain product line. Whatever it might be, the responsiveness is what is going to mean that you can either become successful or not, in my view.
And I think it's so interesting that you're using this word response so much, because I think one of the things we've been through at Classroom Secrets is sometimes that would be called react, but they're different things. Reacting is different to responding. Reacting makes it sound like you didn't think of that in the first place and that it's a rush. And sometimes responding is that way, but responding also can be more planned, it can be more thought through, it can be more of a choice rather than reacting to everything. John, I could carry on this interview for hours, but we best not. Thank you so much. What do you think we've not talked about that we should have talked about that an education business owner should know?
Far too many things than we have time to go through now. But I'll leave you with one point, right? I think the nature of education is changing around the world, different paces in different places. And I think one of the things that's becoming increasingly obvious to me is that effective private provision and that is provision that's led by either individuals or private companies that have got the right kind of ambition and motivation in mind, is far, far superior to monolithic state-run institutions trying to dominate provision. The tuition sector is a great example of this. The tuition sector is entirely private and entirely spontaneous, right? No one set out and told anyone to become tutors. Nobody set out and gave any mandate from on high on what people should do. Nobody told people to go and create these little EdTech companies or these alternative provision companies, all these things. What's happened is it's spontaneously developed at people that really care about education. They want students to do well. They have sets of skills or they have training, which means that they feel like they're really well placed to do that. And they see a need that they can fill and they go and fill it. And that is effectively the free market just responding. And in education, many people in schools, they kind of get this view that privatization is bad. And I like people to take a step back and go, privatization is not bad. Privatization can be bad if it's done badly, right? In theory, there's a lot of state provision, which is terrible. But the problem is, state provision doesn't have the effective responsiveness and feedback loops. If you don't like what your school is doing, you probably don't have much you can do apart from leave, other than complain. And your complaint may or may not be listened to. Okay. And if your head teacher or senior leadership team is really great, maybe they can try and accommodate it. But 9 times out of 10, they probably can't do too much. And they'll be tied by constraints, policies, rules set by people above them, and they'll be tied by legislation, regulations set by people above them, and this whole system is not responsive. So when people struggle in those systems, whether there is a teacher or whether there is a student, and they fall out of those systems, the private sector magically creates opportunities for those people, whether it's for the teachers in providing tuition, or whether it's for the students in finding the online school, the virtual school, the hybrid school, or the tuition provision, or the homeschooling network group that's going to meet their needs best. So the one thing that I think is going to be really interesting over the next couple of years in education, I think this is happening in different countries at the same time, and although at a different pace, is we're seeing a rise of much more variety of education provision and much more of it from the private sector, where the provision is generally speaking on a global level and a higher quality on average, and far, far more responsive to needs. So it can adapt so much more quickly to student needs. And ultimately, the whole point of education is we want students to succeed. That's not going to be done best by monolithic state institutions that are trying to dominate every aspect of education, where their reforms take years. A student will already be years older and therefore halfway through their education by the time the state has reformed its SEND provision or its reform. And they're not criticizing any particular country here. All countries face the same problems when they come to trying to offer state-run provision. So I think we shouldn't be scared of the idea that appropriately regulated private provision with safeguards and rules in place, we don't want people to just do whatever they want. We want appropriate safeguards and rules in place. The Tutors Association has constantly been pushing this under my leadership. But appropriate regulation for private provision is the way that education is going to be transformed in the next 20 years.
Wow, what food for thought. That's really something to reflect on. John, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed chatting, and hopefully we'll get to chat again sometime.
Sometime soon. Thanks so much, Claire. It was really, really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for listening to the Education Business Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets. To find more resources to grow your business, visit classroomsecrets.co.uk.